Hello, and welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Arts Summer Lecture Series, hosted here in the Pennsylvania Chautauqua's Hall of Philosophy. I'm Jay Noble, the director of Mount Gretna School of Art. I just want to say a few things about our school, just in case there's someone new. It's a 7-week summer intensive program, residential. Students travel in and compete to get in from all across the country and internationally, believe it or not. We have about 15 instructors and critics that come through in 7 weeks. Students live and work in the cottages around Mount Gretna and have a classroom space up in the Heights Community Building. One of the lead painting instructors, Rachel Rickert, is going to be giving her talk to them. She's been here working with the students for about a week or so now, so I'm sure they're eager to hear a little bit about her own work. I want to thank Stinson Stroup for his support of the lecture series this summer, and also Purpose One for their support. The Pennsylvania Chautauqua, this is a big deal to be able to use this building every summer. It really feels great for our artists when they visit. They know that, like, oh, this is a community that really takes what's happening seriously and cares about it. It's wonderful. I'm going to introduce Rachel. I didn't really know Rachel, but I'm always on the hunt for changing the faculty around each year. And I'm like, who's standing around outside painting? I know Rachel's going to talk more about this, but her work has been increasingly moving towards the great outdoors and spending out times outside in nature. And I really think that's important about this school. It might not even really be a landscape painting school or a plein air painting school. For me, it's more about that, the quality of being outside and the direct sensory presence of nature. It's about the artists seeing and feeling and those connections with the rain and the heat and the insects. That's all part of it, Rachel Rickert is a landscape painter who lives and works in Joshua Tree, California, most of the year and spends the summer teaching at the New York Studio School, where she just conducted a plein air painting marathon prior to arriving here to work with our students. She holds an MFA from the New York Studio School and a BFA from Washington University in St. Louis. Her work has been exhibited at Lowell Ryan Projects in LA, Jill Newhouse Gallery, New York, Alice Govan Gallery, Portland, Maine, Auxier Klein in New York, Denise Corey, New York, Painting Center, New York, and Capsule in Shanghai, China. She has been an artist in residence at the Gentile Foundation, ACI residency in Italy, the Vermont Studio Center, and James Castle House. Her work is held in collections including the Xiao Museum of Contemporary Art in Shandong, China, and the Boise City Department of Arts and Art History, and has been featured in the Paris Review, Two Coats of Paint, Art Spiel, The New Criterion. So she does have a current exhibit at Pamela Salisbury in Hudson, New York through July 20th. If you're passing through, stop by. So everybody welcome Rachel.
Well, thank you so much, Jay, for that wonderful introduction and also for inviting me to be here and teaching. Thanks for all of you for being here today and everyone in the community and everyone who's supporting this amazing school. And also thank you to the students because you guys have been so fantastic. And I'm excited to tell you a little about myself today. So we can dive in. So this is the only painting I'm going to show you that was not made completely outside. But it sort of sets the stage for this whole story of how I really fell in love with plein air painting. I lived in New York for 10 years, and I was very much a studio painter. I've always painted my life as it's sort of unfolding and what's around me. So in New York, it was interiors and figures, buildings, self-portraits. But at the end of 2021, my husband and I decided to go on an adventure. We had been wanting to move somewhere else. And it kind of took living there through 2020 for me to be like, okay, I can leave. but we didn't know where we wanted to go. And he works remotely. And I said, okay, technically, so can I. And I had been sort of craving a way to shake up my studio practice. So that's when I got my first French easel. And we hit the road, and we spent most of 2022 on the road. And I painted wherever we went. So our first stop was Joshua Tree, California. We drove across the country to get to Joshua Tree, because it's a rock climbing destination. My husband's a rock climber. And I kept him in New York for so long. So I said, now you decide where we go, and I'm just going to paint wherever we are. So this is one of my first plein air paintings. And I really quickly had to learn how open-minded you have to be and how open to change you have to be in your work. I was extremely frustrated making this painting. You might be able to tell at the top, it used to be a blue sky. I had started it in the afternoon. I was getting so frustrated, I threw it on the ground. I tried to start another painting, and then I looked up and the sun was going down and the sky was pink. So I picked the painting back up and worked back into it. So kind of already I had to learn to embrace the chaos. And my first plein air paintings, was definitely fighting that. It's so different than when you're in the studio. You have no control over what's happening around you, and you have to lean into it. So at the beginning, my paintings definitely, I think, feel frustrated. You can see I'm kind of working through these problems in the painting. It can be really overwhelming in the landscape to pick what to paint. And I know we talk about this in class too. So what I started to do was tag along with my husband when he'd go rock climbing, and I would paint whatever he was climbing. So I used him to select my subject. It also felt like a really natural transition from working from the figure. Suddenly creating this painting dominated by rocks was a stand-in for a body. I could imagine this being a torso or a back. Most of my early plein air paintings were vertical or square, because I was also still kind of resisting the idea of classic landscape and the idea of the expanse. So I thought if I zoom in and make more of these portraits of these rock walls, that's sort of an easier way in. So I would follow him out and see if this will work. So that's me set up. And there he is. Hi. So we used to have these very different lives. Our passions sort of had nothing to do with each other. And when we left New York, I started tagging along on these climbing trails, suddenly our passions directly supported each other. And I like this idea of this sort of transfer of touch. He's touching the rock, I'm touching the paint, touching my surface. That was my way into the landscape. This was my first horizontal painting, and one of the only ones I did for about 8 months outside, still very much dominated by this rock structure in the center. Another nice thing about this was that the first people to see my paintings were rock climbers. For rock climbing, you need a climbing partner. So he always had climbers around him. You know, painting is a bit of a solo sport. And we would head out, I'd set up, they would climb, I would paint, we'd meet back at the car, and it was always rock climbers looking at my work. I was really anxious when I started making this type of work. It was very different. I left my life in New York and I totally changed what I paint. So it was this sort of gentle acceptance at first that it was rock climbers who have no idea about the art world. They didn't care at all. They were delighted to see what I was capturing. And it became really fun to see how they could recognize the climbing routes that I was painting. So they go, oh, that's this route here. And it was so much fun that my husband actually put on this website called Mountain Project, which is, if you're a rock climber, yeah, it's how you kind of connect with other climbers. It's great, you know, all climbs everywhere. You can research them. And he put a bunch of my paintings on there to see if people could guess the routes, and they did. And that was really satisfying. It was just like, again, that sort of gentle acceptance of this new body of work. The art world can be scary. And when you change and leave the art world, it can be scary. And I was certainly told not to leave New York by a lot of people. So in my rebelliousness, having just sort of climbers be my audience for a while felt really good. So after we spent 2 months in Joshua Tree, we got back on the road and we spent some time in Nevada. So that's me painting in Nevada on the left, as well as in Utah. Ended up going back to New York because I had a show of figurative work at the time, which was a little disorienting to come back to New York and show those paintings. And then we spent some time in upstate New York, again, following climber and painting climbing routes. And then following my rock climber husband, led me all the way to the French Alps, where he was on an ice climbing trip in Chamonix in France. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to come and I'm going to paint. So in Chamonix, you can take a cable car all the way to the top, which is about 13,000 feet up. And that's where the ice climbers go. That's where if you do Mont Blanc, that's where you go. But there's also a stop, and it's total tundra up there. It's wild. There's a stop in the middle that's more about 8,000 feet. So you're way above the town, but you can also still look up and be kind of amongst the peaks. So I would take the cable car up, even though it's terrifying. And also a funny thing about this is I'm afraid of heights. So a lot of people, oh, do you rock climb? I do not. I never want to. But I do love mountains. And suddenly something that I thought I was kind of afraid of, I had a way to capture through painting them. Sort of with plein air painting, you are touching the untouchable, especially when you're painting things like weather, these distant peaks that maybe somebody's up there, but it's not me, right? But now I can sort of have that adventurous spirit. And it's interesting. My husband will say that I'm very brave, and I never thought about myself in that way. I always felt that I was afraid of things. But, you know, leaving New York, choosing to paint this way, he saw that as very brave, whereas I see him as very brave because he's the one ice climbing in the Alps, right? So these are two of those paintings from there. And you can see I'm still sort of thinking about the mountain as these sort of portraits. It's so interesting when you're plein air painting because it really can feel like you're making a mess. So the one on the right, I was totally frustrated with that painting. I felt like I was getting completely lost. I couldn't tell what it was. But again, I bring it back down. And who sees it first? Rock climbers. And they immediately recognize the route. And it was like, okay, I did capture some sort of likeness if they can recognize how they would climb these mountains. So from Chamonix in the Alps, I ended up in Italy. So Italy was the first time that I embraced the idea of painting the expanse. So I was starting to zoom out a little bit more and having a little bit more of the world around, as well as it's the first time I sort of leaned into painting more of the sky. My early work, you'll notice, is very land dominant. I was shying away from the most tumultuous parts of the landscape, and I was mostly painting midday because the light's a little more even, things are a little bit more still. And in Italy is when I thought, okay, I'm going to zoom out and paint more space. And I'm also going to include a little bit more of the sky. So I was in Italy for 5 weeks doing a residency. It was also really intimidating painting in Italy because of how beautiful it is. You know, everyone has an idea of the Italian countryside. It's gorgeous. And it's sort of what is my way in? How can I attempt it? So I faced my fears in trying to paint that sort of idyllic farmland. And then I also started to kind of push a little bit out of it. So the painting of clouds here, that actually started as a painting of this sort of old castle ruin. And I was getting very frustrated and I kept wiping it away and wiping it away. And I looked up and there was this donut cloud, this cloud that had a hole in it. And I just started painting it. And then as I moved from that cloud and around, it was just all clouds. And suddenly I made a painting without a horizon line. And I was kind of horrified when I made this painting. I was truly embarrassed. And I want to say that because I know my students, they're very hard on themselves. We all are, right? So I want to talk about that with my own work because I do it too. It can be really hard to see our own work, especially in the moment. I think especially with plein air, when you're dealing with the sort of chaos of the experience, that all is kind of infecting the way you view your work. So when I saw this cloud painting, I was still thinking about the failed painting I set out to make, not what it became. And I also was just kind of horrified about this idea of only painting clouds. It felt against the rules somehow. But what it taught me was that I actually love painting clouds. I had been a little bit intimidated by them before because, again, they're moving very fast. That's one of the fastest things happening out there. How can you attempt to capture it? But after the cloud painting, I started to lean into that. And so I started to paint more sunset, nightfall, early morning. So the painting with the cypress trees was kind of post sunset, and there's just a little bit of light left on the horizon. And it also led me to keep getting looser with my work because things were happening so quickly. You cannot capture as much sort of detailed information, but you can capture very specific color moments happening together. So after weeks in Italy, I came back to the States. I had 35 paintings in my carry-on. I've gotten really good at traveling light with oil paint. So if anyone, I'll talk to the students about this, flying with oil paint, something I got good at doing, building little shadow boxes. I have this little easel that I can put in a backpack. So I brought back my 35 paintings and I met up with my husband who was in Wyoming. And we set off on one of my more adventurous painting treks yet, which was that we went to the Cirque of the Towers, which is in the Wind River Range in Wyoming. It's about a 13-mile hike in. So we hiked in and we spent 3 nights there and then hiked back out. He said, you know what, I'm going to help you carry your painting gear. And I said, absolutely. So I brought my paints and it was a wild experience because it's total bear country. And so you already have to be really careful with your bear hang, all your food, the clothes that you cook in. And then I'm thinking oil paint has a smell. If my toothpaste can't be in my tent and my paintings, how am I going to deal with this? So I built these little foam core boxes. So that's that photo on the right there. And I pushed thumbtacks through the top so that I could slide a small panel in and it would just rest against those thumbtacks. So I built all these foam core boxes because they were light so that the paintings, in addition to the supplies, could go in there hang at night. And so I could backpack out with my paintings. And I ended up doing 6 paintings. So that's my husband, John, making us dinner over the fire while I was making a painting. It was a really incredible experience. Through plein air painting, I've had just such a different relationship with the world, with the natural world. It feels like my way in. Like I said, when I lived in New York, I didn't realize I was adventurous. I wouldn't have called myself adventurous, but I am. It just is dependent on sort of the environment I'm in. So this was just a really special and sort of the furthest I've ever gone to paint. 13 miles, 35-pound pack, 2,000 miles of elevation gain. It was wild. So that's just one of the paintings I made. I ended up making 6 paintings in 2 days and then hiking them out. After this trip, I had my first show of landscape paintings. It was at Alice Govan Gallery in Portland, Maine. And that was sort of a exhibition of my adventure year. So I had paintings from Joshua Tree, Nevada, Utah, upstate New York, French Alps, Italy, Wyoming. They're all small paintings, all completely one session. But it felt really good to show this work. I've been lucky with exhibition opportunities. When I was first offered a show with this gallery, I was not making landscape paintings and it was not going to be a landscape show. But when I shared the work with Alice, the new work, she said, yeah, this is what we're going to show. So it was this great opportunity to sort of culminate my adventure year. But after my show in Maine, I ended up back in Wyoming, except this time it was November and it was northern Wyoming and it was the snow. And this was a whole new experience, painting outside in the snow. It was the first time I had a studio in a year. Because at this residency, I had a big proper studio. And yet I still went outside and painted in the snow every day. And the other residents thought I was crazy. But I loved it. And it was this, what color is the snow? I still don't know. And that's sort of the joy of it, is that you can paint something like that and see it differently anytime. And I also felt a little more liberated to attempt the sky. Because it was so cold, I would also try to work quickly. So I would work at those times of days when things were happening. So more sunsets and things like that, because I only want to be out there for so long. We'll see how long I can stand it. Okay, just to show you the glamorous life of a plein air painter. This is what you look like in northern Wyoming when it's 15 degrees and it's hunting season. So you have to wear an orange vest. I loved it. After being in the winter in Wyoming, I ended up back in Joshua Tree. And this is when we decided to make Joshua Tree our home. We both really fell in love with this. I love the desert landscape. I've become very attached to this exposed sky, this really clear land-sky relationship that you have out west and in the desert. So this painting is from my house. So you'll see this view a lot. I'll point it out over the years. I've been painting it a lot, but this was the first time I painted that view. And then from here, I spent the next couple months painting a Joshua Tree. I wanted to include this photo because if you haven't been to Joshua Tree, it can be hard to picture. So this is what it looks like. A little bit like an alien planet. I think it's a really fun place to paint because it's so bizarre. You don't really have as much of a preconceived notion of, for example, what a Joshua tree looks like. When you paint a cypress tree, everyone kind of has an expectation of what that cypress tree should look like. every Joshua tree looks ridiculously different from the next one. So it felt very liberating to be in that landscape, settling into the desert and really settling in to plein air painting. So over the next couple months, I kept painting out in the desert and thought more and more about the sky. So it's a sort of post-Italy, I had this renewed interest in the sky and leaning into those tumultuous times of day. Late in the day, I would go out, I'd start painting golden hour, then I'd paint sunset, then I'd paint nightfall, kind of all in a row. And all these paintings I've showed you so far are pretty small, as you can see, and they're all completely one session. So it is what it is, right? And then you move to the next painting. Do you ever cancel plans because of the clouds? Because I started doing that. Southern California is beautiful, but often just a perfect blue sky, right? So when we get clouds, you better believe I'm painting. Again, after that Italy painting, it really unlocked my love of clouds. I think I was afraid of them at first too, because they felt a little cheesy. A lot of plein air painting can kind of have that. My mentor, Graham Nixon, he leaned into that idea and he painted sunrises and sunsets for a whole career. And they're brilliant and provocative, but he thought it was kind of subversive to be painting something that is a little bit untouchable in that way. So I started really leaning into painting the sky, painting the clouds, and seeing what could happen. These two paintings were the same night. I knew I wanted to paint the moonrise. Often when it's a full moon, I'll go out into the park and set up, get ready to paint. I live about 7 minutes from Joshua Tree National Park main entrance, so it's really easy to get into the middle of nowhere very quickly. So sometimes a little too eager and you set up and it's still daylight. And I thought about this when some of the students were painting the night this weekend and they said, oh, well, this one was just me waiting for the night. So then I put this slide in because the painting on the right or the left was me waiting for the night. So the same thing. And also something I've said to the students is if you're having a hard time loosening up or seeing big shapes, paint something far away from you. So that's what I did with the painting on the left. It was the furthest thing I could see. And I was pretty loose about capturing it because I literally couldn't see any more information than that. And then it's a really fun moment when the full moon rises over the hills and you can try to capture it with your headlamp, the bugs, the coyotes howling. It's wild. So then I went back to Wyoming. We spent another summer in Lander, Wyoming. It's in central Wyoming. It's a beautiful area where you have access to the Wind River Range, which is a huge mountain range, the Red Desert, which is the largest unfenced area in the United States, farmlands and forests. So it kind of has a little bit of everything. So I love painting there. I would often, per usual, follow rock climbers around. So this is at an area called Wild Iris. It's about 8,000 feet up. They would often do the approach with the rock climbers. So you'd kind of do the hike in towards the base and set up wherever they're climbing. For this one, we didn't make it out of the car because it was thunderstormy. And we sat in the car waiting for the storm to clear. They were a little nervous about going out there. And I thought, well, I'm all the way up here. I'm going to paint. So I did this painting actually through the car window with 3 rock climbers in the car that were watching me paint. And it was a pretty funny experience. They have strong opinions. This is also from up at Wild Iris at 8,000 feet. From there, you can look out to an area that's called the Red Desert. What's painted here is Oregon Butte, which was a landmark on the Oregon Trail. So the Red Desert is a really cool area because it's also where the Oregon Trail, California Trail, Mormon Trail, and Pony Express Trail converged in the desert. And so the butte was the symbol that you were almost at Oregon territory. So that's why it's called Oregon Butte, even though it's in now Wyoming. And I don't know if you know Maynard Dixon Cloud World, that painting. This painting, it was sort of inspired by that. It's in New Mexico, but it has a butte and this just incredible sky of clouds where they felt very three-dimensional. So that's when I looked up and I saw this view. I knew I had to paint it. Again, following rock climbers around led me to Yosemite. I had never been there before, and my husband was doing a route on El Cap. So I decided to tag along. And when they set out to do a route, I got up with them in the morning and I sort of had my day following the rock climbers. So they got up at 2 a.m. to head down. So I got up at 2 a.m. and head down. And what I had wanted to paint was dawn wall. which is the third image. You see that beautiful light that hits the top of that wall. That's why that face of El Cap is called Dawn Wall, because of that light. And I knew I'm going to paint that, but it was so early in the morning when I started that I ended up doing 2 paintings before dawn. And that first image, you can also see the headlamp of the climbers on the wall. So I'm standing right in front of what's called the Nose, which is the most famous climbing route on El Cap, which my husband has done, wasn't doing it this trip, he was doing another one. But it was really amazing to bear witness to this mountain that my husband has climbed. And also my dad's a rock climber. So it's been kind of a funny thing getting to know more of my dad as well through painting things that he's climbed all over the place. So that is the El Cap painting after the sun came up, sort of the biggest one. So after Yosemite, I had my first landscape show in LA called Wind and Rattlesnakes. I had 35 paintings that were from 5x7 to 14x11. So all one session paintings from California and Wyoming in this show. And the title of my show was after this quote from The Solace of Open Spaces by Gretel Ehrlich. Highly recommend that book. It takes place in Wyoming, and she's writing about her time there, but I'm just going to read this quote, which is where I got the name of my show from. To live and work in this kind of open country with its 100-mile views is to lose the distinction between background and foreground. When I asked an older ranch hand to describe Wyoming's openness, he said, "It's all a bunch of nothing, wind and rattlesnakes, and so much of it you can't tell where you're going or where you've been, and it doesn't make much difference." There was a climbing route in Wild Iris, one of the areas I was painting, that was called Wind and Rattlesnakes, based off this quote. And so I wanted to use Wind and Rattlesnakes as the title for that show, because also the first person to climb that route was a woman. And so she's the one who named it Wind and Rattlesnakes. So from the author, Gretel, to the woman climber, Amy, who put that route up, to me having my show, sort of women in the West finding their own way. So after my show of tiny painting, I've been challenging myself to work larger and over multiple days. It's a very different process. What happens when you return? Because instead of capturing hours of time passing, you're capturing days of time passing. How big can I work outside? So that was me. That was me outside Bishop painting the Eastern Sierras last summer. This was in New Mexico. This painting also showed me how when you work bigger, it becomes a little trickier in the wind, because that painting is a sail. So this painting kept getting knocked over. My whole easel was ended up on the ground. So I actually made most of this painting on the ground, kneeling over it and looking up. So it has kind of strange, I think, perspective, because it has low looking across and taller looking across. I also often work on a toned ground. That's sort of my first mark out there, is toning the whole ground. And this is a painting where you can see a lot of that ground was left. And that had to do with the fact that I had to leave New Mexico the next day. So I painted as much as I could, and that was it. This is, again, the view from my house. This is one of the bigger paintings that I've worked on outside. This is a very short window of time, maybe half an hour a day, where the hills were illuminated with this golden light. So I had to paint in short sessions over many days to try to capture this view. I was also challenging myself to see how big of a painting can I make in one session. So this is almost 3 feet by 4 feet, and I did it just one shot. But again, painting at night is a great way to attempt something like that. You can't see very well. So you have this freedom while you're painting. And this is also the view from my house, which is nice because it's right outside my studio door. I can drag my huge easel outside and my huge painting table instead of carrying everything on my back. But then everything sort of changed. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm working on most recently. I went to New Mexico and I learned how to make pigments from the earth from an artist named Stella Marie Bear. I studied with her for 2 days in this earth pigment making apprenticeship to learn this new skill. And at first I thought it was just sort of a curiosity and we'll see what happens. But I've become pretty obsessed with it. All these paintings, it's so important for me to be outside amongst nature. Everything is completely outside. I have this connection to the land through painting it and being around it. And I've been thinking about how can I push that even further? How can I deepen this connection with the land? And it really was, okay, now I'm going to make my paint from the land itself. So a lot of people ask, well, how do you do that? What do you do? It's more simple than you think. You start by collecting rocks and then you smash them. This is back in my studio at home. This is my favorite smashing rock. And it's really sort of this simple process that has become very meditative. So first you smash the rock into smaller pieces, and then that goes into a mortar and pestle. And I start with a marble mortar and pestle, and I keep smashing it until it's a consistency that I can start to grind it. And I grind it and I grind it and I grind it and I grind it for hours. And then that goes into my ceramic mortar and pestle. It helps me refine it. And then I put it into little glass jars. And then when I want to make it paint, I just add oil. So I've experimented with linseed oil, but I mostly now use walnut oil with just that rock turned to dust or sand or soil turned to dust. And that's paint. And suddenly I got to participate in this sort of ancient ritual. And it also introduced this more meditative process. Plein air painting is spontaneous, adventurous, it's quick. I'm outside, and suddenly I have something I can do in my studio that takes so much time. It is so slow. So I'm combining now two speeds in my work, the slowness of the paint making and then the speed of the painting. These are my first two paintings I made with rock paint. So after I learned this process from Stella Marie Bear, I had a residency in New Mexico at Sunlit Ranch. And so I made a series of pigments from Santa Fe and then also from Tucumcari, New Mexico, where this residency was. And then I made two paintings, top and bottom there. Those are the paintings. That's Tucumcari Mountain. And it was such a limited palette based on what I was used to. My other work, you can see very saturated, very colorful. But as I talk about in class, you know, color, saturation, all this stuff is relative. So in these worlds of rock paint, there is still a lot more color than I was expecting. And I got to do things like go to the base of this mountain to collect the dirt, to then come back and make paint from to paint the mountain. I felt so connected to a certain place. There are refinement techniques you can use to get your pigment to about 200 microns, which is when you buy pigment, that's what it is. My hand can really carry it to about 100 microns, but I don't do the refinement process because I want it to sort of be as far as I can take it, and that's it. But it was tricky learning how to paint with this because it's gritty. It doesn't behave the same way. I mix it by hand, it's imperfect. It started to drip and drop and feel dry. So it's this really experimental process. So I want to mention that you're not allowed to collect, it's called rock hounding from national parks. So I don't do that. You are allowed to rock hound in most Bureau of Land Management lands, a lot of national forests, and then private property with permission. So if this is something you're interested in doing, please do so responsibly. You can look up ahead of time if you're going to an area, whether you can collect. And rock hounding is the term used. Though this was in Nevada. After New Mexico, I went to Nevada and made pigments, and you can see how much cooler they were, bluer, paler than the New Mexico ones. So when I make my little color charts, the first block is just the rock pigment. And then I would use titanium white from the tube, store-bought, mixing in to make variations of that color. So these are paintings from Nevada. So what I would do is I'd collect rocks. I'd go back to my studio. So I'd have kind of collection trips, grind them into pigment, and then I would return to where I collected the rocks to paint the land with the land. So every pigment series was very specific for a place. I would only paint Nevada with my Nevada pigments. It really felt like this self-portrait. And when I'm out there painting, I felt like it was more channeling. The material was already what it was supposed to represent. So in a way, I just have to put the material onto this surface, and it is what it's already the image because it is itself. And this is, you can see I had to lean in a little bit to letting the paint do its thing. It was very heavy, some of these rocks, and it would pull down and sort of melt into each other. And I would mix it by hand with oil. So sometimes the more oil content would be more liquidy. And I really had to learn to embrace the sort of, I'm not sure what's going to happen with this paint. I'm going to present the material and it will do what it will. I also went to the Tahoe Basin, South Lake Tahoe area, to Fallen Leaf Lake and made pigments. I was really excited because I was in Tahoe and I thought this was maybe just more of a desert thing. And I was in the woods. And then of course I started collecting rocks, and I had brought my normal paint and I was just going to paint. But then I got so distracted by collecting rocks and I was so excited that I actually started smashing the rocks up on site, which I hadn't done that before. To be like, can I make paint out of this? Yes, I can. So with this painting, this was the most literal return. I went exactly back to the spot that I sat and collected rocks and crushed them to make this painting. So it felt really good to be in the same footprint of where those rocks came from to make this painting from Tahoe. Then I found myself outside of Bishop in the White Mountains. Bishop is in Owens Valley, and you're between the Sierras and the White Mountains. So it's this really beautiful, incredible area. And the Inyo National Forest has the ancient bristlecone pines, which are the oldest living things on the planet. And of course, found myself some rocks. I've always been kind of the kid who has rocks in their pocket. That collection instinct as an adult has always been there. Whenever we're on a beach or something, I want to collect shells. I want to do that. And suddenly that impulse had such a purpose. And it became such a thrill to be able to do that, collect rocks, knowing I was going to try to transform them into paint. And these were really bright and they were very soft rocks. So they were a real joy to crush into paint. So then I returned to Bishop to again paint the land with itself. So this is me looking up at Black Mountain, which is within the White Mountains. So I was in those hills collecting those rocks, and then I came back looking up at them to paint them. I was also wondering, I still have this interest in the sky, right? And it felt really natural to paint the land with the land. Can I paint the sky with the land? And it's something I'm still kind of wondering and experimenting with. And this was after I had painted the previous painting. It was a sunset, and there was a stripe of heat on the horizon. And I did have a yellow red that could kind of approximate that. So I was attempting to then, can I lean into painting the sky the same way I was before? We'll see. So then, of course, I had to make paints from home. And I was so surprised by the colors I could get from Joshua Tree. It was so much more vivid than I was expecting. And also some really dark colors. The Nevada ones were quite pale, same with sort of Tahoe Basin, but I was able to get some extremely dark colors. The bottom one, number 10, is with sand from my front yard. So because I was able to get some dark colors from Joshua Tree, I was able to attempt a nocturne. And this is again that view from outside my studio that I painted a few times that I'm very attached to. And it was a thrill to try to paint at night with the rock pigments. And can I approximate this sensation with the limited palette of my Joshua Tree paints? And I was again kind of working in these pairs, thinking about painting the same thing at different times of day, capturing it in different ways. And again, color is relative. So to me, it felt like I had a full palette. I wasn't missing anything from these rock paints. So then this leads me into my second show in LA, which was last December, and it closed this past January this year. And that show is called Rock and Sun. And it had pigment and painting series from New Mexico, Nevada, White Mountains, California, Tahoe Basin, California, Joshua Tree, California. And that was also a literary quote from Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey, which is another book I really recommend. So I'm going to read you the quote. Men come and go, cities rise and fall, whole civilizations appear and disappear. The earth remains slightly modified. The earth remains, and the heartbreaking beauty where there's no hearts to break. I sometimes choose to think, no doubt perversely, that man is a dream, thought an illusion, and only rock is real. Rock and Sun. So this is the wall of, I had a few of those pairs painting the same thing. And again, these paintings were pretty small and all one session paintings. So after this show closed in January, I was back home and I wanted to push even further the paints that I could make from the Mojave Desert, which is where I live. So I made 10 more colors from Joshua Tree. And I want to talk about that dark one at the bottom, number 20. It took me weeks to make that color, and I was so excited about it. When it rains in the desert, it pulls the sand into these streams. And you start to notice that there is black granules of sand mixed in with the lighter sand. And because that black sand is heavier, the water pulls it and it starts to gather. So I noticed this after a rainstorm, and I collected the sand, but it was still very mixed in with the pale colored sand. So I did a process called levigation, where I would put a bit of the sand into cups and add water, and you agitate it so it's all mixed up in the water, and then it settles. And it has that natural weight difference. So the black sand is at the base, the lighter sand is at the top. And I would use a dropper to extract the water, and then I'd let the rest of the water evaporate. And then I would very carefully scrape that lighter sand off the top. And I did that about 100 times. So you can see a little bit of that process there. You see that light sand sort of separating on top. I did it until there was no granules of that light sand. It was 100% that black sand. And it's an iron oxide sand. It's actually magnetic. So you can use a magnet to help extract it too, but it wasn't as particular as my method, and I didn't want any of that light sand in there. So it's also very heavy. It's metallic and it's sparkly when it's sand. It's a really interesting material that was probably from meteorites millions of years ago. And I ground it up, and even though it was sand instead of a rock, it was very hard to grind up because, again, it's this metallic material. But it made the darkest, richest color I've ever made yet. So I say it was worth it. So then I was painting around my home in Joshua Tree I had now 20 colors to work from, my fall colors and the ones I just made this spring, capturing the land around my home. And also enjoying playing with the idea of the sky again and clouds, embracing it a little more than I did with my previous show, which was mostly sort of land. And painting again those sort of tumultuous times of day. This is where you can see that black sand at use. With a little bit of white in it, it became purple, which was incredible. So you can see a little bit of that in this painting here. The Joshua Tree pigments were really some of the most vivid that I made. You can see a little more of that purple in some of the shadowy spaces in this painting. So it felt at first a little hard to be thick with this paint because it takes so long to make it, and you're a little wary of using too much of it on one painting. So I had to learn to let go of that and just kind of embrace it. Sometimes the material calls for a thicker mark, even though you're thinking that took me weeks to make that one brush stroke. But for this next body of work, I leaned into it a bit. I would experiment with painting on toned ground like I did with most of my previous work. So some of these works I had toned ground, some not. So this one I did start with sort of an earth yellow tone, painting in Indian Cove, which is an area in Joshua Tree National Park near home. Little leaning in more to the abstraction of nature when you work from life, worrying less about the clarity of the image and letting the materiality be as much of the experience of viewing than whatever that image is, whatever it's supposed to represent. This was the one that I did, the most sort of classic Joshua Tree view. I had greens that I was able to make from Joshua Tree, so I thought I could try to paint some of the trees and things. And the park really feels like this. It's mountainous, and there's a lot of stacked space with open plains, lots of Joshua trees, distant mountains. I also played around with making some work without any tube white. So this one has no white. This is 100% rock paint. I had some paler colors, so I could kind of use that again to think about metaphors for what I was looking at. So yeah, the sky was not blue, but I thought maybe I'll have a tone that relates to the sky so it can read spatially in the same way. This is in the low desert. I live in the high desert. This is just half an hour down the hill, Desert Hot Springs, looking up at San Jacinto, which is a really cool area to paint because you're basically at sea level and it's hot. And you're looking up at snowy mountains that are 12,000 feet away from you. So it's very dramatic to be that far away from the subject and to be in 95 degrees painting the snow. This one is another one that I didn't use any white, and another nocturne view from outside my studio. And this is the last of that yellow. And with this paint, you know, sometimes it would just be one rock and I'd grind it up and I'd make paint from it, and that was it. I'll never have that color again. So that was the last bit of this bright yellow that I had. Hopefully well spent. So then I wanted to make more paint from the Mojave, but not directly around my home. So I drove a little deeper into the desert. About an hour and 15 minutes from my house is something called the Amboy Crater. And it's a dormant cinder cone volcano surrounded by volcanic fields. So it's in the sort of stark desert. And then all of a sudden you see this cinder cone volcano. And you can hike to the volcano and you can hike around the rim of it and inside of the volcano too. So I went there to collect volcanic rock to try to make paint from. And I was surprised at the color variety. I thought it would be all kind of black and gray, but the volcanic rock took on a lot of different colors. And there was also this sort of sandy clay in the center of the volcano that I wasn't expecting to find, that I also collected. So then back in the studio, grinding up the volcanic rock, because the volcanic rock was quite porous, it was not too hard to smash up. So that video at the beginning was actually me smashing up some of the volcanic rock with my favorite smashing rock. That is a precious object in my studio now. Some rocks don't want to be paint. I will try to smash some rocks. And if it's too hard to smash, I go, you don't want to be paint? And I return it to the land. I always take it back with me wherever I collected it and I give it back. I don't just throw it in my yard. If it's Nevada, I wait till I'm back in Nevada and I give it back. I'm interested in what my body can carry the paint to. So I'm not using machines. I'm not using refinement techniques. It's, you know, if my muscles can't smash it, it's not going to be paint. It's going to be gritty if that's as far as I can take it, grinding. So the Amboy Crater pigments were so rich, these blacks and reds, so dark, that I was really excited to go back there and paint the crater. So this is the first painting I did back in the crater, trying to capture more of a portrait of this object. I painted a few times that you'll see. And again, leaning into the sky, not shying away from the sky. It was a stormy day. I thought I'm going to try to capture some of that moving around this volcanic crater as well. And then I kept returning to the Mojave. There's lots of different views around that crater, not just the crater that I had to paint, but from that area, I wanted to paint around what I was seeing. And again, this was made during the day. It might seem like a evening painting, but I'm approximating what I'm seeing. I'm using metaphor, I'm using equivalence. I didn't have a blue paint, right? So I'm going to look at what I'm seeing and translate it with the palette that I have. This is another view down into the Mojave Desert, and I have to give my truck a shout out because well, in the beginning of my journey, I was doing a lot of far treks and I would go miles maybe sometimes to paint. This process is a little bit trickier because I'm actually bringing out powdered pigment on site and I'm mixing it into paint right before I use it. So the back of my truck became a little bit of my mobile studio. So I wasn't ever too far from my truck, but I would fold it open and set up and take my hard-earned dust out into the windy desert, pour it onto my palette and try to hide it from the wind and drop walnut oil into it and mix it on site in the bed of my truck. And then I carry that palette and my easel and go out and paint. The paint, because it's imperfect, because it's handmade, it doesn't store very well. It starts to try to separate until you sort of use it. So that's why I mix it on site. So I'm really interested in kind of pushing plein air, pushing the process. So taking this sort of studio-based thing of and the glass jars and all of that, but outside, because it's, again, so important for me to be making this work outside. And always leaning into whatever that paint wants to do. Sometimes the drips would take over and I would often try to fight it and put more paint kind of, no. And then I turn around and look back and the painting is like melting off. And I go, okay, that's what you want to be. So these really rich reds and black, which did feel like they came from a volcano. But also painting up in the sky. And I want to show this one too, because I dropped this painting when I got back to my studio. And I thought it was ruined and I turned it around and I said, okay, it's a little smushed, but it's still there. And that's part of plein air, is you really have to embrace the chaos. I've dropped paintings face down in the sand. The previous one actually has a lot of sand on it. It blew across the surface. You can kind of see it looks even grittier than usual. I thought, well, it's made from dirt, so maybe that's okay. You do kind of have to embrace whatever's happening. It's part of the painting. So this is my final painting that I did of the volcano. For my show, which Jay mentioned, I don't have professional install shots yet because it just opened the night before I came here. last Saturday, and then I got on a train from Hudson at 7 a.m. to be here. And this show has all this work from the Mojave Desert. So it's from the volcanic rock and the Joshua Tree pigments all around the Mojave where I live. And it's called ash and cinders because that's what the volcano is made of. I feel really grateful for the life that I get to live and spend all this time outside. Ever since I left New York, I didn't really have a separation anymore between my life and my art. It's just all my life. And it feels really good to live that way. I think also in New York, the city has a way of making you feel small in a way that can feel bad. Outside, I feel small in a way that feels powerful. What a privilege it is to be here, to get to paint this, to be amongst this, and to capture land that, you know, we think will outlive us, but we don't know anymore. So in a way, these paintings might have a little bit of a memorializing of our environment. So yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Susan. I think you mentioned that you do use white paint. Is there a reason you can't make that white pigment from the white cement that would work that way?
I haven't been able to make one that's opaque enough to have the same sort of tinting properties. I've made pale colors that kind of on their own approximate an off-white, but they've been quite translucent. A lot of them are from quartz-based things. So they're a pale color, but they don't have the same tinting property. But it's something that I'm after. And actually, while I've been here, a neighbor of mine was like, I have this chalky white rock I found. I'm going to bring it over. It's something I'm on the hunt for. And this is like, yeah, people bring me rocks now, which I love. I actually want to do a whole series of pigments that's rocks from other people from around the world. My mom was in Portugal, brought me some rocks. And so feel free to give me some cool rocks that you find. Yeah, it's something I hope to be able to do. I just haven't had the right rock yet.
Ever tried to consider plant-based?
I haven't, because they're not archival. So they will degrade over time. So I am trying, you know, people have asked how archival are these paintings? And I go, you know, we'll see. But technically they should be okay. I mean, this is kind of cave painting, using pigments from the earth in this way. But when it's organic material like that, it will degrade over time.
I had a question about if you doing many paintings and not making paints while you were here.
I thought about it, but I didn't for two reasons. One, I don't have enough time. And the show that I have up, I spent 3 months making the paints and 1 month making the paintings. And also it's kind of loud. And it's a lot of smashing and grinding, and I share a studio and a house, and we have some neighbors that might be like, what is going on over there? It's a bit of a disruptive process, so I wasn't sure I could get away with it.
And so inside by you're showing about the natural statements that from the labs that you already know. Just interested to just comment that interesting that in Vietnam we have local art. And we use a lot of pigments from the nature, from the earth, from the eggshell, from the seashell, everything. That's traditional lacquer. So we just use lacquers art. And now I am inspired by Rickert to use it for oil painting.
Yeah,
we tried it.
good.
And maybe I will send you some of the pigments there.
Yes.
From the ancient peoples, traditional. From a lot of things, everything around us.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
And maybe I'll have to come visit. And yeah.
But for lacquer artists take a lot of time to do. So I prefer to do it before. So you can capture the emotion and feelings of the nature.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, that's
Thank
awesome.
you.
You're welcome.
Hello. I'm wondering if you think about learning from technology at all.
Oh yeah. I think every step I'm further away from the city, I'm rejecting modernity more and more. Yeah. I mean, my husband keeps being like, there's gotta be a faster way. And he's looking at mining equipment on eBay. And one of my next door neighbors too is like, I have this. And I'm like, no, no, no. It's just me and my mortar and pestle. I'm really interested in like my relationship with the land, just my body and the land and what I can do. I mean, I should be making my own walnut oil from walnuts, right? How far can we take it? I'm sure I can take it further. And that's also, you see where I like painting. I'm in the middle of nowhere. There is not humanity where I'm painting. And that's what I like. Not that I don't like you all.
I guess I wanted to ask also, does it take a long time to dry since it's
Yes.
very oily?
Yes, and it's stressful when I have a show deadline. And I sunbathe the paintings, and yeah, I knew I had to stop a month before I had to ship them.
So a lot of your paintings are pretty small, like 4 by 4, and lots you talk a lot.
Trying to get close. Yeah, with the rock paint, I do feel like I'm able to because I don't have as much control over it. It doesn't behave in the same way. So I really can't even manipulate it with a small brush. I need a big brush in order to even scoop up enough of the material. So it does have that sort of loose energy. You know, it might not be all the way far away. But I'm still thinking big brushes, big marks, and a more kind of energetic way. While occasionally letting myself get it, you know, that moon had a pretty tight circumference.
I have a question. You talked about letting go, because I was reminded I am also somewhat a ceramicist. So you spend hours making them, and then you just kind of throw it into the kiln, and you're wondering, you're letting it up to kind of think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a constant battle, and it's something that's sort of a lifelong pursuit, letting go both in your life, but also in your art. Because I spent so much time making the material, I feel like my hand is already a part of it. I've already done a lot of transformation. This alchemic process has happened. So in a way, it puts a little less pressure on the painting. The making of the paint is such a part of the art that I'm halfway there. So when I'm painting, then I just present this material that I labored over without as much pressure to render. It's more, how can I put this material down so you can feel the material as what it's supposed to be, instead of how can I manipulate the paint into an image. So that process has allowed me to let go a little bit. And with other work too, with not paint that I made, choosing those times of day that are the most tumultuous was sort of my way to force myself to let go. You can't be stiff and hold on to things when a thunderstorm is approaching, when the sun is setting, when you're painting in the last light of day and it's about to be pitch black. So I leaned into painting at the most chaotic times of day with the most ephemeral moments, because it forced me to let go, as opposed to painting midday, steady light, you know, that kind of thing. There's always stuff moving and changing. But if it's something that you want to lean into, I encourage you to paint the things that are the most untouchable, the most intangible. So paint that cloud, paint that rainstorm.
Any place in the world that you would like to paint that you have?
Oh, what a great question. So many places. Well, I've never been anywhere in Asia, so it's somewhere I'd love to visit and learn. Yeah, I mean, Vietnam would be incredible. My mom's actually going to Vietnam this fall, so maybe she'll bring me some rocks. Plein air painting has allowed me to experience the world in such a different way, where I can go somewhere and have an intimate connection with wherever I am through painting it. So it's sort of just opened up things way up when I think about travel. So probably somewhere in Asia. That's very broad, but I'd love to go somewhere there. Japan is pretty high on my list too. And then also Australia, maybe visit Helen, and anywhere there's a nice looking dirt and rocks has also become of interest to me. So kind of deserts around the world too. No, yeah, that's a good question. Well, thank you. I see both things existing at the same time. I had 2 shows sort of back to back focusing on the earth pigment. So I was focused more on that for those shows. But something I'm really interested in is still working larger outside, and how big can I go in one session? So I see it all sort of unfolding together. And I'll be doing some painting over the next week here, not with paints that I made. I haven't painted with store-bought paint in months, so it'll be kind of fun. Because I do love color. and I build my worlds with color. So it's been an interesting lesson working with the limited palettes and relying more on touch and tone. And again, just leaning into what's sort of given to me by the earth. But I see both sort of existing, both things I want to keep pushing further. I kind of feel like I've only just begun really with both.
I remember when this was last year, the final project we did.
I have done that. And like when we worked together last summer, it's when you're in the studio, it's going to be a different thing. We have a tendency to just want to blow up a small painting, but it's a totally different process. And so it has to be as open to change as what happens outside. So I have done a little bit of it, but it's hard to get me to paint in the studio these days. And I find I'm more conceptually interested in just for my own personal work and the experience of being outside and having that 360-degree feeling, the wind, the weather, all of that, that's a part of the painted image. And there's a control that happens in the studio that maybe I'm still sort of trying to develop a relationship with again. So I have done it. I can show you. Whether they worked or not, I'm not sure. But it is something that I wouldn't shy away from in the future. And it's something that some artists really do connect with.
I was thinking about how you moved from New York City out of that degree, and a lot of artists kind of, I think, define success by, but also having this desire to be out, you know, in a much more rural area.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've been thinking a lot about how I define success for my life, and it changed when I left the city. And when I left, people in the art world told me not to, that it was going to ruin my career. And I not only left, but then I completely changed what I was painting. And I felt a bit rebellious, but at the end of the day, I said, okay, my new definition of success is being happy. And the city did not support that anymore. But I do recognize the city as being a part of my career. So I go to New York multiple times a year, and I live 2.5 hours from LA. So I can visit the art world, be in the city, be a part of it when I need to. But then I have my life that's a lot more protected. It's quiet, it's beautiful. It's all about making the paintings, not about what happens to them later. And when I lived in the city, you're kind of always aware of what could or should or what you want to happen to the paintings after you make them. The art world, I felt like was inside the studio with me. It was getting in my head a little bit. So I needed that physical separation to make work that felt completely genuine. Not like I was trying to make art, but I was just painting. But I did spend 10 years in New York, and that's where my career was started. So I kind of paid my city dues, and I have a lot of the opportunities I do because of that time in the city, connections I made. And I recognize that being a part of a community is important. So not only locally, but being a part of the art world. So when you go to the city, you're visiting shows, you're meeting artists, you're still participating and supporting it. But I think also, you know, as much of I don't lean into technology when I'm painting, it's quite a tool for connection, and it allows, I think, people to live in more remote places and still be a part of the sort of critical community. I teach a drawing class for the New York Studio School. They have a full-time virtual program, and I teach for my studio in California, and I have students all over the country and the world. So that's a way that technology allows me, also supports this lifestyle that I prefer.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.